All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Karen Legacy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Associate Director for Graduate Student Programming and Pedagogy at the Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Innovation here at Penn. I'll share a little bit about myself very briefly. I have a PhD in chemistry, and prior to joining CETLI and Penn, I worked in primarily teaching positions at a variety of institutions. So I have spent quite a bit of time revising and refining my teaching philosophy, which is what I'm here to talk to you all about today. I would also like to point out that joining me to help with today's workshop is my colleague, Michelle Johnson, who has a PhD in History and African American Studies and is the Associate Director of Inclusive and Equitable Teaching at CETLI with me. I'll also let you know that after the workshop has concluded, we'll be able to share some of these resources with you and some of the information. So jot down notes that you think are useful, but don't feel the need to write down absolutely everything that we're talking about. We'll make sure to get these resources to you as well. I would also like to point out that we have the Q&A function enabled. So if you do have questions as you're going along, there will be some points where I make sure to pause to take some questions. But if you think of something and you want to make sure that it gets addressed, you can drop that into the Q&A. Michelle will be helping me monitor that during our workshop today as well. So today's workshop, I've organized kind of in two main phases. So phase one is the philosophy. So we'll begin by going over some prompts and reflections that you can use to help yourself consider your teaching philosophy and what of your tangible practices contribute to that philosophy. If things don't just freeze up for me, there we go. We'll think a little bit about how to communicate that philosophy. And then the second kind of phase of the workshop today is looking more at the crafting of your teaching statement for the job market. So that's going to include thinking about the motivation for writing the statement, some important things to consider, resources available to you, and I'll provide some details on how CETLI can support you as you go through this process as well. So to think about phase one, the first question that we're thinking about is, how do I figure out what my teaching philosophy is? And a teaching philosophy is a personal reflection that outlines your beliefs and approaches to teaching. It's important for those entering the academic job market. It serves as both a guide for your pedagogical practice, and it's a necessary document for job applications. So this statement can help you articulate your teaching goals, your preferred methodologies, and your vision for student engagement and learning outcomes. So as you are contemplating your teaching philosophy, consider the purpose of education, your passion for your discipline, the strategies you believe are most effective for student learning. You can reflect on your classroom environment, mentoring style, and assessment methods. And this introspection will not only clarify your values, but it also showcases your commitment to fostering a transformative learning experience for your students. And if everything I just said feels really abstract and you find yourself kind of facing writer's block in thinking about what your teaching philosophy is, here are some things that you can do to get started. So I have here for you a list of statements, I statements that you can fill in as you are just kind of starting a journal to brainstorm what your teaching philosophy is. So you can complete the statement, the purpose of education is to. What does that answer for you? I want to teach in my discipline because, and I know there's got to be more than just I want a job. What is that reason that you want to be teaching? You can also complete the statement, students learn best by. When I am teaching in my discipline, my goals are. The most effective methods for teaching are, and I know this because. And you can also complete the idea of the most important aspects of my teaching are. You can also consider topics such as your approach to creation of classroom environment, effective use of classroom space, strategies for content delivery, skill development techniques, your mentorship practices, because mentoring is a part of teaching as well, your methods of assessing student learning, and how you encourage student engagement and participation. So again, these are all some prompts and contemplations that you can use to start helping yourselves articulate what that teaching philosophy is, start keeping a journal, writing some things down to help you start to think about how you would communicate what this philosophy is to someone else. So this is where the broad strokes of the philosophy portion of the workshop end. And I'm going to move into the more practical aspects of how this shows up in job application packets and the actual documents that you need to prepare. So as I go through the next portion of the workshop, I will make sure to pause for questions at opportune moments, but I would like to remind you that you can also type any questions that you have into the Q&A. Michelle will help me keep track of those questions and we'll make sure to get those answered for you during the second part of the workshop. So for this next portion of the workshop, I've organized it into a series of questions that you may be asking yourself as you're working on preparing and refining your teaching statements, preparing and refining your application packets as you're entering the job market. And the very first question you might find yourself asking, it's on the slides here, why write a teaching statement? And the simplest answer to this question is because academic job applications require them. But the way that they require them will show up in different ways depending on the particular application that you are looking at. So what I have on this slide are excerpts from two recent assistant professor job postings, one in leadership and human behavior at the U.S. Naval Academy, which is an undergraduate serving institution, and one in physics and astronomy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is a large public flagship R1 university. I know there's a lot of text on these slides. As you know, job applications are very verbose. This is actually a simplified version, but I'm going to point out some highlights for you that are useful in thinking about what needs to go into a job application to highlight your teaching expertise. So the first thing that I want to point out is that the blue text for each ad are excerpts of the application instruction. Each application instructs you to share information about your teaching. The Chapel Hill posting specifically asks for what they're calling a teaching and mentoring statement as one of the documents. The instructions indicate that they are seeking candidates who can teach effectively at the undergraduate and graduate levels because that's reflective of the student body that they have. The Naval Academy posting instructs that teaching interests and experiences should be addressed in the cover letter, and then it also asks that a sample syllabus be uploaded. I also want to point out that while academic job postings are often quite verbose, that can be very helpful to you as you refine your statements and the other materials that you're preparing for your application, because they're going to be telling you what they're looking for in a candidate. So the Naval Academy posting explicitly states that they expect candidates to have a strong commitment to undergraduate teaching and directly describes the courses that will be taught by this particular hire that they're looking for as a course on applied behavioral science for leaders for first-year students and a course on organizational behavior for third-year students. That's very useful information to have. You can describe exactly how you would teach those courses because the posting is telling you that's what they're looking for in their ideal candidate. The Chapel Hill posting describes the types of students the candidate would be teaching, as over 60% of all college graduates from UNC Chapel Hill have taken a course in our department. Among them are undergraduate level arts majors who should master the power of quantitative reasoning, undergraduates seeking a degree in another of the natural sciences who need a physics as a foundation for their advanced scientific training, the small number of undergraduates who major in physics, and this is also really useful information to have. You can describe how you would teach to such diverse backgrounds and reasons for being in your course. And all of this is to point out that even a flagship R1 like UNC do want to hire professors who can teach their students. So the next question that you might ask is, will a great teaching statement get you a job? To which I answer with a quote from James N. Lang of Assumption University, who has stated that in all of the countless meetings I have sat through to discuss the applications of job candidates, the only times I've ever heard a teaching philosophy mentioned has been in reference to some memorable and specific strategy or story that a candidate described. So this is to say that you want your statement to be authentic to you and to show those tangible things. You want to be able to tell the story of how your teaching and strategies will work for their institution to make you a good fit for their department. Here we go. The next question that we might ask is, who is your audience? So broadly, your audience is the search committee, which is usually comprised of relatively senior faculty in your discipline. Some institutions do require that someone external to the department sit on the hiring committee to ensure fair hiring practices. But for the large part, it's going to be mostly faculty from the department that you are interested in. So generally in your discipline. The other thing to keep in mind about your audience is that they are going to be reading many applications. So again, this is the reason to make sure that you're sharing specific things about yourself, specific stories and strategies that will stand out from the big pile that they're going to be working their way through. The other thing to keep in mind is that your audience is going to have varying teaching philosophies of their own, and that's okay. You're not trying to persuade them that your way is the quote right way. You just want them to know that you have good ideas about how to teach their students and that you have a good grounding in what you believe is good teaching. So you're not trying to persuade someone, you're just trying to explain to them clearly and thoroughly how you approach things. So the next question that I have for you as you are working on your documents is, what is your teaching narrative? And this is where I'm going to step away from being a little bit so hyper-focused on the teaching statement and think about all of the different documents that are generally part of an academic job application, how you want to make sure that you have a narrative across all of those to make sure that all of those parts are working together to communicate about yourself as a teacher. So with the caveat that every application, every institution is going to do things their own way to a certain extent. For the large part, an application will contain a cover letter. And this is where you should have about 2 paragraphs about your teaching, one describing what you have done as either an instructor of record or as a TA, and the second describing what you will do as a joining faculty member at their institution. An application packet will also contain a CV. And this is where you just have that list of all of your teaching experience in chronological order with a brief description of the roles to explain what the course was and what you did, what your role was in it, because the names of courses and the exact details are going to differ across institutions. So the CV is where you just give that chronological list of what you've done. The teaching statement, which I'm going to not dwell on at this moment on this slide, because that's what we were talking about in the rest of this workshop. But this is what we've been working on here, this full document that's devoted to your teaching. Some applications will also ask for a teaching portfolio. Sometimes this will also show up as being called evidence of teaching effectiveness, which could ask for all sorts of things. So this is another place where it would be very important to look at the specific job posting to make sure that you understand what they're asking for. They might ask for sample syllabi of classes that you have taught or that you would propose to teach at their institution. They might ask for course evaluations from students. Sometimes they will ask for some sort of supplemental document where they've prepared specific questions about teaching at their institution. So that portfolio is something that's a little bit broader that can kind of encompass whatever extra details that particular institution is looking for. The other aspect of the application packet that should address your teaching are letters of recommendation. So at this point in the fall, this is a good time to really think about your mentors and faculty that you know well. Who among your recommenders can write about your teaching? Because you want to make sure that you're requesting someone that can include, in addition to all the wonderful things that they can say about your research and your mentoring, someone should be able to address what you are like as a teacher in their letter of recommendation of you. So I'm going to make sure to take a pause here. Michelle, are there any questions that have come up in the Q&A that have not been answered yet?
There are no questions in the Q&A so far.
All right. Would anyone like to ask a question before I move on in the application packet to the specifics of what I call the capital S statement?
Hey, Karen. First, a comment, then a question. The comment is, I think the Q&A feature is actually turned off, so that might be why there are no questions. If you potentially could double check that. And my question was more focused on for letters of recommendation. So if you're interested in applying to like mostly R1 institutions, but let's say you have someone who could like speak really strongly on your teaching, is it worth having one of those recommenders be like a teaching person, or should you just kind of have a more research person comment on it, if that makes sense?
This is one of those things where it's hard. I can't give you like a strong yes or no answer. If you are, even R1s do care about the ability of their faculty to teach. And you do want to make sure that you have the strongest packet of recommenders that you can come up with. So that's the sort of thing I can't give you an answer about picking one person over another one, particularly considering every application is going to ask for a different number of recommenders as well. So sometimes they ask for 3, sometimes they ask for 4, but you want to make sure that there's someone in there that can actually comment on your teaching ability, because that is something that departments do look for in the faculty that they're bringing on. Again, I do apologize that some of the times when you're asking questions, I'm going to give you an answer that is, I can't really give you a solid answer because every institution does things their own way. But we want to make sure that you feel like you are ready to handle these application packets.
Aaron, I have one question in the Q&A now.
Okay.
And it does appear to be working now, which is good.
Wonderful.
So question asks, 2 paragraphs in the cover letter seems like a lot of real estate. Is that for a teaching specific job or research as well?
So I'm defining paragraph as something that could even be small. So I'm not thinking about paragraph in terms of like the 5-paragraph essay that we're all thinking about from high school. So it's more be prepared to talk about the teaching that you have done and the teaching that you will do, because what these applications are looking for is not just the experience that you have, but the fact that you are forward thinking to how you will be as an independent instructor of record, just as they're looking for how you will be as an independent researcher, evolving from what you did as a PhD student where you were mentored by a faculty member. So I would maybe adjust my statement to think about it less in terms of paragraphs and more about making sure that you are addressing your skill set and how you can be forward thinking.
One more question.
Okay.
Is it a good idea to include reference letters from students you have taught/mentored when applying for teaching focused positions?
So those letters from students or quotes from students about you as a teacher, that's what can come up in that portion that I've labeled the teaching portfolio. The actual teaching statement should be your own voice. So you want to make sure that the teaching statement is your philosophy. The portfolio is where, again, I'm being a little bit wishy-washy on how I'm exactly stating this answer, because it's going to be very dependent on the specific position that you're applying to and the department that you're applying to. So I know that some hiring committees will not read anything that was not explicitly solicited in the job posting, and some places are happy to read everything that is sent to you. So this is another one where it's going to be really important to glean all of that information that you can from the job posting and see if they're asking for statements from students. Quite often they will, and if that's something that they want, it will be explicitly stated in the job posting or in the portal that you go through to submit the application. All right. I have a few more questions to go through that you can think about as you are writing your statements and working on your packets. So the next question that you can ask yourself is, what should you write about? So you might have noticed that I've kind of transitioned to talking about a teaching philosophy to talking about the teaching statement. And this switch that I'm trying to make here is intentional. You want your writing to not be broad and philosophical. You want to be writing something that is tangible and specific, that is going to really clearly define who you are as a teacher. So you want to make sure that you're writing about your teaching goals. What content and skills do you want students to leave your class with? Key components of teaching that you think are important in your discipline. So this could include how you instruct students to prepare for class, how you use in-class time, how you approach assessment design, how you approach mentorship. You can talk about what are the challenges you see in teaching and learning in your discipline, including your strategies and ideas to overcome those challenges. So again, hitting on this idea of what you do now and what you anticipate doing, what your strategies will be as that independent instructor upon joining their institution. And the other thing you can talk about is your teaching evolution. How have you changed and improved as a teacher? And how will you continue to evolve? Again, parts of this document should be forward-looking. So overall, this document should be a concise and concrete account of your teaching goals and strategies, describing not only what you do, but what you see your students do. You should be able to accomplish this in 1 or 2 pages. Again, look carefully at job postings to see if they indicate a page limit. You want your readers to come away from your statement wanting to talk to you more about your teaching. So don't feel the pressure to make this document be everything. It's this idea that you want to make yourselves seem interesting enough that they're going to want to interview you to talk to you more about what you do. So the last question I have for you to ask yourselves as you're preparing this statement in particular is, how should you write? And to answer that, be concrete and specific. Be concrete and specific. Can you tell that this is important? You want to use an affirmative approach. What I mean by that is be clear about what is important to you without speaking poorly about other approaches. Remember that your audience might not agree with you on all points, and that's okay. It's okay to be a part of an institution where people have different approaches to teaching, as long as you're all working together to support your students. You also want to use intentional examples from your teaching experience. That's why on one of the previous slides, I kind of highlighted the fact that on your CV, you already gave that chronological list. So you don't need to do that again in your teaching statement. The statement is the place for you to spotlight what you think is most important in the way that connects the threads of your teaching most clearly. And again, you can also write about what you will do. Remember back to those job postings that I shared with you, they specifically described the courses or the student body that they are looking for the candidates to teach. So you can make sure to address those in the way that you're describing your forward-thinking portion of your teaching statement. All right, I'm going to pause again really briefly here. I know that we are getting short on time, but I do have some time for answering some questions.
Okay, one question. Is there any benefit to talking about teaching experiences you've had outside of academia? For instance, if you taught in other environments before?
So I think so, from my personal opinion, right? You can think about how experiences you have teaching and mentoring translate into the classroom. So Again, it's the sort of thing that don't describe it in the same way that it would show up on the CV. If you have other teaching experiences or mentoring experiences or volunteer experiences that have really informed in concrete ways what you do in the classroom or what you would do, use it as those stories, as that narrative to point out specific things about yourself as a teacher. Do we have anything else in the Q&A?
Yeah. What about teaching outside the US? Is it worthy to explore?
Again, it's something that, from my personal opinion, it's informed you as a teacher. So I think it is something good to address. Again, it's going to connect into that forward thinking area that if you're applying to a position in the United States, talking about how you're teaching outside of the United States has informed how you'll be as a teacher, and then connecting it to how that will then inform what you will do teaching in the US context. I think that is a place where you need to make that connecting thread from your past experience to your future experience. I do have a couple of really important things that I want to make sure to share. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, and then I'll make sure to open up the Q&A again. So just a couple of more things that I want to share with you today, some advice and some resources. So another question is, what should you be doing with the rest of your time at Penn and beyond to keep preparing? So I would encourage you to keep what I'm calling a teaching diary. Write down important things about noteworthy moments. Teaching narratives are a component of tenure review packages as well. So even once you get that wonderful, beautiful tenure track job, you're going to need to write a teaching philosophy statement again that should be showing how you continue to evolve. So writing down those important things that you notice about your teaching in some sort of diary or journal or Google Doc, just someplace to make sure you're keeping track of it, is useful. Again, thinking about those letters of recommendation, it's a good idea to invite your mentor or mentors to observe you teaching so that they'll be able to write about it in their letters about you. And something else you can do if you have not done this yet is draft some sample syllabi so that you have those ready should an application ask for them as part of the portfolio. I also want to give a shout out to the Academic Job Search Handbook. In this link here that I'll make sure to share with you after the workshop, there is the full ebook text access to this through Penn Libraries. So you all have access to this as you are working your way through the job market. And the other thing I want to point out is that Setly is here for you. We can help you with all of the teaching aspects of your academic job search. So for all of those questions that you are feeling are quite specific to your case, we can consult with you about the paragraphs of your cover letter that address your teaching. We can go over your teaching statement and portfolio with you. We can do a mock Zoom interview where we help you practice some questions about your teaching. And when you are invited for a campus visit, we can help you prepare for your teaching demonstration and host a practice run. And then the very last thing that I'm going to ask of you, I will leave this up here while I return to answering some questions in the Q&A, but this QR code will take you to a feedback survey that I would ask you to fill out. This feedback is always helpful to me. I try to make sure that I keep adjusting these workshops to meet the needs of grad students here at Penn. So thank you all very much for joining me today.